Well, thank you for joining us today for our 4G podcast. I'm Pastor Brian, and our 4Gs, well, we call them Gs because it's easy to remember, and pastors like alliteration, right?
There you go.
The first G is to gather. We want our people to gather with God's people. It's important. God deserves it, and we need it. The second G is to grow, and we believe spiritual growth is intentional. It's not automatic. You have to go after it. You need to be in the Word. You need to grow. That's partly why we do this podcast, to help people grow. Our third G is to give. We want people to give what God has given to them for His glory. And our fourth G is to go with the gospel to our neighbors and to the nations. And we've been doing this podcast. We're coming up on 100 episodes. On several of these episodes, I've profiled a pastor in the community, and I love to have guys on who are planting a church in the Quad Cities, and that's what Tanner's doing. Tanner, good seeing you, brother.
Glad to be here, man.
This
Thank
is
you.
Tanner Smith. He's the pastor at Pathway Church in Moline. I always forget that's 12th Avenue.
Yeah, we're right between, if you know where Youth Hope and Wilson Middle School are, we're right in between those two.
Yep.
Those are landmarks. So, yeah.
Or when Family Video was in business, just to the east of that.
Yep, just past it.
Okay.
Yep.
Tanner, we've been talking a lot about the importance of testimony, and we love hearing how people came to know Jesus. Let's start there. How did the Lord save you by His grace?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I was forced into the faith. I'm joking, but my dad's a pastor.
Okay.
And so I grew up in the church, grew up in the faith, like pretty much as you could. My dad pastored several different churches, but the one we grew up at, at one point had 4 services. And so it wasn't abnormal that my dad would take me to a Saturday night service and then 3 Sunday morning services just to get me out of my mom's hair. So that was, growing up, that was, I was raised in the faith, and that's, it's interesting. I think a lot of people overlook that. Because it's not as flashy, like as some people's testimonies are, where God brings them out of incredibly dark places. And then, and the older I've gotten, the more thankful I've been.
Yeah.
Because now looking back, I'm like, man, God protected me from so much that I didn't even know at the time,
And that's what you and your wife want for your 4 children.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. We're doing our best, it's a funny thing because, we have 4 young children. We have 4, our oldest is 5 and our youngest is 4 months. So I'll let you do the math on the other 2. But,
we don't see each other a lot, fairly often, but every time I do, you have a new baby.
Yeah, so. we like to joke that we have a very healthy strategy for church growth.
There you go. Yeah. That's right. You're living out Deuteronomy 6 too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, but it's that's a ministry in of itself,
Sure.
And I think a lot of people miss that. And something I think that we love at our church, we have a lot of young families, is just championing moms bringing their kids to church. Like most people, like a lot of people have kids, and it's easy, I think, when you get past having kids to forget how hard that can be. Like to just get kids up and dressed and their teeth brushed and out the door. And, so like we celebrate when moms come in 15 minutes late. We're like, you're here. Good job.
Isn't it funny too? Like when dad's in charge in the morning, I have 4 daughters. And you can tell when dad's in charge, and the little girl doesn't have her hair done. It's in her eyes. The outfits don't match, but they're here.
Yeah. You're better than I am, man. We're lucky if like the kids don't have toothpaste in their hair. So, so anyways, grew up in the church, and like a lot of young people who grow up in the church, I had a lot of head knowledge, and when I was in high school, was really when God moved that head knowledge down to heart knowledge. My whole life growing up, people would tell me, "You're going to be a pastor just like your dad," and I hated that.
Oh,
Hated
okay.
it. I did. Because all I wanted to do was play baseball. I was a baseball player growing up, and I didn't want anything to do with ministry because like I had been behind the curtain, if you know what I mean. And you see the hard things, like as a pastor's kid.
Yeah.
Like, I remember...
You see your dad come home from a business meeting.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
oh.
yeah. Or not being in bed when I was supposed to, and overhearing stuff from the top of the stairs, and it's hard. And this isn't like pedestal pastors. I am the opposite of that. But a lot of people don't realize the weight that church leaders will carry just from wanting to love their church well.
Yeah.
And so I didn't want anything to do with that. And when I was in high school, I went on first I had a pretty radical encounter where just heard the Lord. I needed a moment with God where my head knowledge moved to my heart knowledge, and I was at kind of a crux point. Like I never had that. Like there's kind of a joke about there's two type of pastors' kids, right? Like I was the good kind most of the time, and but I had a moment where the Lord just revealed Himself to me, and everything that was up here trickled down to here. God got a hold of my heart, and the next summer, I went on a kind of a quasi mission trip that we went to the East Coast and we're visiting church plants. It was a Christian ministry called the Restoration House, and I don't know if this is still true, but at the time, New England was like the hardest soil in America. Like
I think it still is, and the Northwest coast, right?
Okay.
Oregon, Washington, but yeah.
Yeah, so like hyper intellectual, very cold, not very friendly. And per capita, it was also like the least Christian place in the country. And so I remember we were traveling around to different churches. And as we were traveling around, like we were visiting with these pastors, and something that was just God got a hold of my heart, because like I just heard them talking about their desire to see people come to know Jesus, and it was like
it kind of caught their passion.
Yeah, and as that was happening, I remember there was one pastor that was sharing, and I couldn't even tell you his name, couldn't tell you like what city he was in. I'm terrible with details, but remember, like as he was sharing, like I kind of and people believe a lot of different things about the Holy Spirit, so like I'm not here to like tell you what to believe, but like I very clearly heard the still small voice of the Holy Spirit whisper to me like, you could do this, and I was like, do what?
This same kind of thing.
Yeah.
Planting a church.
Yeah, and
oh, wow.
And so like from that moment on, like the trajectory of my life changed. Like I went to school to be in ministry, and just knew like that was what God had called me to do. And so that was my junior year of high school. And so like it was like in a moment, like God led me to know Him. And then after I knew Him, He was like, now here's what I want you to do.
There you go.
Yeah. And so it was
there's a time of surrender there.
Mm-hmm, yeah, for
so
sure.
You knew you were saved,
Mm-hmm.
kind of had knowledge,
mm-hmm.
surrender, and now a burning desire to help people find Jesus.
Yeah.
And kind of seeing the beauty of the church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maybe from a different perspective of
mm-hmm.
how important it is.
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm.
I love it. So I know a little bit about your story. You're from Peoria, right? And then you also ministered in Galesburg. Is that right?
Yeah. So my family moved around a lot growing up. My family, my parents currently reside in Chillicothe, where my dad works at Northwoods Community Church. Yep. He's the kind of quasi missions and pastoral care pastor there. So that they moved there my senior year of high school. I'm trying to get this right. So I was at college when they moved there. And then I actually started working when I graduated from college for Northwoods. They had a campus in Galesburg that's now a separate church. That's an autonomous church called the Ascent. And so that was like my first job in ministry. Yeah. So
I know Northwoods because I pastored in Pontiac, Illinois.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Northwoods has a lot of influence
mm-hmm.
in that part of the state of Illinois.
Yeah.
And even beyond.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Seeing a lot of people come to know Christ and discipled in the faith. That's a great environment for you to be part of. So then how did God take you from ministering at Northwoods, at now called Ascent in Galesburg, to Moline, and why did you pick Moline?
Yeah. See if I can be succinct. Like I said, I grew up in the church, and one of the things that was really interesting, that is not a condemnation, but I had like 4 different youth pastors over the course of like 6 years. That's a pretty common normative thing. Like when you get a youth pastor who stays in a church for an extended period of time, what a blessing that is. Yeah. And so when I got called into ministry, that was something like that was kind of in the back of my mind. Like I'm never going to do youth ministry because that's not what God's called me to. And I'm not going to do that to students. Like I'm not going to come in and use like a stepping stone to another thing. And so it's really funny when I was graduating college, like, we make plans and God laughs. And so graduated college, and a good friend of mine who, I'd done an internship at the Galesburg campus for Northwoods, and he called me and he was like, "Hey, Tanner, I need somebody to come fill this position as a youth pastor." And I remember I was like, man, I'll think about it. Hung up the phone, and like in my head, I'm like, no chance, zero. And there was just something like that God, like I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't supposed to shut that door, even though everything in me was like, I don't want to do that. I don't feel gifted to work with students. And at the time, what was really intriguing was so Northwoods had several multi-site campuses, where they drop a screen down, but they weren't doing anything with church planting. And so like it made even less sense. Like, God, this is what you called me to do. I don't want to do this, but somehow like and so I couldn't shake that itch, if you will. And so said yes to that. And it was like 6 months later that Northwoods started talking about planting churches. And I was like, like maybe God knows what he's doing and I don't.
Kind of moving away from the satellite screen.
Yep.
To that's good ecclesiology, isn't it?
Yeah, there was a directional shift there, and I can't speak to that, super well. But so we were there for about 3 or 4 years. While we were there, I kind of went through, they actually started like a ministry school. So I did my master's degree there while we were there. And then it was summer of 2019, I think, somewhere in there, summer of 2019, where we kind of got pulled out of youth ministry and assigned to start getting ready to plant a church. And what's funny about that is, like, before I was like, let's not do this. And the circumstances that led to that, without getting into too much detail, were completely beyond my control. And so it was like, before I was like, we have to do this. Let's figure out how to do it. And then all of a sudden I was like, whoa, I'm not ready to do this, but we have to go.
It's time.
Yeah. And so I have a very dear friend who functioned as my church planting coach. He's like a guru. His name's Jay Nicholas. He's worked with a whole bunch of different organizations and denominations and churches, and the guy just lives and breathes church planting. So if you ever have a question about church planting, call me and I'll give you his phone number. Okay. I don't know anything. Jay knows everything. So he started helping coach me to get ready for that process. And when we were getting ready, one of the things that we did that was really interesting, and again, just I got to give credit to Jay because this is his kind of like pet project. He put together this process called TAP, which stands for Target Analysis Process. And so it was basically, we put a team together of people and asked them to do the work of helping us pick where we were supposed to go. So that was scary because, like,
were you open to go anywhere?
Yeah. So that was part of the deal, was like we kind of had final say, but the only reason to do that process is because, and this isn't a critique, but a lot of churches get planted, and when the motives aren't right, people are like, I kind of like to pastor in Florida or Denver or wherever. Yeah. It's like, God's calling me to Hawaii, you know? And so we got this group of people together, and the goal was for them to find where God was at work, where there needed to be a new work, and where we would fit, you know? And so part of that was like the logical, like doing a bunch of research, traveling to different places. The other part was like prayer and fasting and just listening to the Holy Spirit and having, like, we would we started with a list of about 30 towns and cities, like kind of all over the United States, mostly Midwest. And then it got whittled down. And when we got down to like the last 3 or 4 locations, we actually started driving to these places and like, we called them field trips. So we'd take this group of like 10 to 12 people and go walk around in that city and like just ask people questions. Like we were kind of undercover. It was fun. We'd go to restaurants and listen.
So just kind of informal questions.
To
get a sense of the need, the lostness in the community, what other churches are here, all that.
And so that process concluded, very affirmatively, like that this was where we were supposed to be. And a big part of that, and you probably know this, Brian, I don't know if it's still true, but at the time, the Quad Cities area was in like the top 20 metropolitan areas in the country in terms of percentage of people who are unchurched or dechurched. And what's funny is like
number 16 or something.
Barna
report.
And so what was funny for us was we'd never been to the Quad Cities. We lived in Galesburg for like 4 years, but because
you never came here.
No, we'd never been here.
You guys would go to Peoria.
We would go to Peoria
for big city stuff, right?
So we were like, what is this place? Like, and so it was like a lot of churches get planted a lot of different ways, but we were kind of what was called like a parachute drop. So my wife and I, we had our oldest son, Dane. He was born 4 days later. We moved to the Quad Cities in April of 2020. And then this little thing called COVID happened.
This small thing happened. That's a really good time to plant a church.
And it was nuts because like there were a lot of people we were kind of journeying alongside in the church planting world. And a lot of people just shut it down. Like, and probably in wisdom and in prudence, like, to look at the circumstances around and be like, it doesn't seem wise to keep going on the path we're going on. And so like we prayed about it and thought about it and talked to people and just couldn't shake like, nope, like God's leading us forward. And from the outside, like looking back on that, like I look at my life and I'm like, you're a moron. Like, but for God, you're a moron. Like everything about that said, don't do what you're doing, And so I remember there were a lot of like early on when like, everybody's wearing masks and like our whole thing, like when we moved here, we knew 2 families in the Quad Cities area. And we didn't know anybody else. Like, and so these 2 families were kind of early, like, they were disconnected from local churches and God kind of like was stirring them to help with something new, but we didn't know anybody else. And so like our whole goal was to come and start meeting people. And then the whole world was like,
everybody sheltered down.
Don't go talk to anybody. Don't go outside your house. And so I remember like, there were some nights like, I've got a newborn son and a wife to provide for, and we're trying to plant a church. I'm like, man, I'm going to have to go get a job at Menards or something. Like, that's the only thing I'm qualified for. And, if you work at Menards is awesome. That's why I wanted to get a job there. Right. But, it was just a crazy, absolutely nuts time. And what was crazier beyond that was like God started moving in ways that we couldn't have generated.
Right. It's the Lord because you couldn't make anything happen during that time.
It was pretty incredible. It was just a lot of like word of mouth. And we were very intentional about like our goal, and different people do things different ways. But like when we would have conversations with people, we were very clear about like, hey, if you're plugged in another church, like this isn't like our goal here is to see lost people come to know Jesus, right? Yep. So like if you're plugged in somewhere else, you need to go talk to your leadership. Like if you feel like God's prompting you or stirring you to come be part of this, we don't want to talk to you until you've talked to them.
Good.
But a lot of the people that we started to meet, it was weird because COVID, I heard another pastor in the Quad Cities describe COVID as like a shaking season. It was like God like grabbed all the churches and started shaking them and people fell out and went different places. And so we inherited a lot of people who were like in seasons of transition, not necessarily for bad reasons. They just were. And so we slowly had this group of people that started forming around this idea of, it's funny because our mission statement is very similar to yours. It's 3 G's though. Well, technically it's 4. Our purpose at Pathway, we exist to glorify God by going after lost people, growing people as followers of Jesus, and guiding people into God's purpose for their lives. You know, so that was our thing. Like, we wanted to keep things very simple, but at the end of the day, we feel like God is most glorified when we are living out Christ likeness, which at its core is leading lost people into the kingdom, you know?
Exactly.
And everything else beyond that is secondary, right? And there's a lot of important secondary things. But that was all it was. We just took the Great Commission and alliterated it. So that was a big piece of our story. And there's a lot more to it. I think we'll get into that maybe in.
Yeah. So Tanner, tell us, what you're describing was a very hard time in our world over COVID.
Yeah.
God launched a church. What would you say was the hardest thing about starting a new church, apart from COVID? Like, what would people not know about planting a church?
Yeah. I think if I can answer the question in 2 ways, I think first is from the overall church planting perspective. There's just so much to do. You don't think about it. You've heard the joke that I have, that pastors only work 1 hour on Sundays.
People love saying that.
Yeah. So we should start a club, the 1 hour Sunday club or something, and then actually start working 1 hour.
It's a good job if you could get it, right?
But it was all of that was kind of amplified because you're starting everything from scratch, and you have no credibility because you have no history. And so there's a part of that that's exciting to some people, but then it's also the flip side of just, it's beautiful and it's also hard. It's complete dependency. Every moment, breath to breath, meeting to meeting, was just, God, we can't do this without you, and there's some, we're still there, but I miss that in some ways. I wish I could get that back.
Right, because now you have a facility and you have a schedule and rehearsal for worship. And
And I think part of the reason why, I don't remember what the statistics are, but the statistics on church planting are the first 3 to 5 years of a new church's life are generally the most fruitful in terms of people coming to know the Lord. So churches that see greater fruit beyond that buck the trend. Most churches are very productive very early on, and then they stagnate.
Because you're laser focused on lost people.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. And
we're an established church like Edgewood. We started in how long? We're 85 years old.
Yeah.
No, 115 years old. And so you can lose your edge.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, no pun intended.
I get it. Yeah. So you have to keep that evangelism value always fresh.
Yeah. And there's the beauty of being a church that has so much history, and the challenge of it is also it's very easy to set up your rhythms, which are beautiful things, right? But sometimes God doesn't work in our rhythms. Right? Sometimes God wants to do something different than it's been done before. And I think that's part of the challenge of church planting, but it's also part of the fruitfulness is you don't have any of that. It's okay, should we do this or shouldn't we do this? And there's no, this is how we used to do it.
Right.
It's just, should we
Nobody
do this?
Nobody could say, we tried that before, it didn't work. You're there is no before.
And so it's, But, so I think that's the church answer. I think, from a personal standpoint, and this isn't a woe is me thing, it's really more of a cry for if you know a church planter, somebody that's in that ministry, it can be incredibly lonely. I'm very blessed now. I have an associate pastor who's on our staff, Tony, who I love to death. I have a group of elders who've been raised up at our church, which is, God honoring and biblical, and those guys are my co-shepherds.
Yeah.
And when we launched, you don't have that. And so you're just you're walking on your own, and God didn't intend for it to be that way.
Right.
I think about even the Apostle Paul, would take traveling, buddies with him, had Timothy, had, and so I guess the reason I say that, again, it's not a church planting is so hard. It's more of if you know somebody who's church planting, just call them.
I'll encourage them.
Yeah. pray for them, but even beyond that, I say this, and I hope it doesn't sound sacrilege. A phone call of 5 minutes from you that you're thinking about them will go a lot further than 100 text messages saying you're praying for them.
Yeah.
Just ask them how they're doing. Like, you don't even have to do anything. Like church planters, I think, would echo this and say, like, money's awesome, prayers are awesome, volunteers are awesome. Sometimes you just need a friend.
Yeah.
And it's a simple ministry, but it's a beautiful one. Yeah. So I had some guys that did that for me that got me through. God used them in that way. So it's beautiful.
How did the Lord meet your needs as a family and as a church those early days?
Yeah. A lot of different ways. One of them that has, completely in God's hands. But my wife and I, when we started kind of like personally fundraising before we moved. And so since our church launched, we have never had a year where we've been in the red.
Okay.
Which is not normal, like for most church plants. We've been self-sustaining since before we launched financially, which is 100% God and generosity of people. So that was a beautiful thing to be able to trust in Him in that. And just like early on, again, just God leading from conversation to conversation, people that He was raising up and stirring to be part of that. Like you trade money for people every day of the week, right? Like if you can find one good faithful servant, that's worth half your budget, And God did that over and over and over and over again. And those people are just dear saints that are like stored up in my heart that I love because they were people that God brought around us, So every time somebody would say, yes, God's calling me to this, I was like, I know God's calling you to it, but I also feel like you're my friend now.
That's right.
So,
and let's stay friends.
Yeah.
Let's partner together, right? Philippians talks about, we're partakers of grace and partners in the gospel. Right? And that you're describing that as team members. You're talking about the encouragement. I can remember shortly after you moved to town, 3 veteran pastors, which means we're old, met over at Pathway Church on 12th Avenue in Moline shortly after you were in the facility. And so it was myself and Brian Smith from Wildwood, and then Ben Lovelady from Silvis. And I'll never forget that. It was pretty special where you showed us around the facility and told the story about there's some believers in that facility who really wanted to see God work again. That had been in that particular building for a long time, and God brought you guys together. But I remember going into your worship center and praying for you. And that's one reason I wanted to have you on the podcast today, and why I've had Doug Rowland on and Caleb Prenovo, 2 church planters in Rock Island. We want you to know we're for you. And there's no competition among pastors. There's people over the years I've been here, since you've been to town, if somebody lives in that area, I refer them to your church. Or if somebody says, hey, what do you know about that church over in Moline? I'm like, where? Oh, 12th. That's a great church. I'm friends with the pastor, right? And what was that like from your perspective? Because I think some church planters feel like maybe a cold shoulder from some veteran pastors who might see the new guy as a threat. Because he's creative and he's got all this energy and right.
I'll go back to something you said, because it's true in this case, but not true in all cases, which is you said that there's no competitiveness. And the unfortunate reality is that's not true everywhere. I would say most places it's not true, which is scary, right? That we live in a world where our Christianity is so consumer based that we've as churches we've come to the place where our main goal is to hold on to people rather than to do what the gospel calls us to do, which is to send them into ministry and mission, which I know is huge for both of us. but for me, it was so affirming, like to know, like, okay, there's people here who don't feel that way, like who are excited that lost people are going to be found. Because you and I know what a lot of people don't on a personal level, which is no matter how hard we try for the rest of our lives, we're not going to reach every lost person in the Quad Cities, right? We could spend every hour of every day and we still wouldn't. There's too many, you know. And so that's the kind of the beauty and the reason for church planting. My friend Jay was really big on this. If the reason you're planting a church is not for lost people to get found, you shouldn't plant a church. There's no other good reason to do it. Right? Like, if your reason for planting a church is you didn't like your former church, or, you think you could do worship better, or you think you're funnier than another pastor, like, stop. Like, it just doesn't make sense, and so the beauty of like having, pastors, and like those are like you and Ben and Brian are all guys that, we get to hang out occasionally and bump into each other and do ministry together. And it's a beautiful thing to see a kingdom mindset in other people. And it's encouraging, because then you feel like, okay, like not everybody here is mad that we're here, and that's awesome.
I think in general in the Quad Cities, the pastors here love one another.
Yeah.
The gospel guys, we're all for one another.
Yeah.
Right? And you and I, we're not able to go all the time, but there's a pastors gathering monthly, and you've been several times. I try to make it. I've not gone probably for 3 months. Recently. But one of the beauties of that, you get 20 gospel guys in a room, and it's like, man, we're on the same team here. And we're all going through, challenges and joys and all of that. And we just, the three of us came as kind of representatives of all the gospel guys here to say welcome. The best way to reach lost people is to start a new church, right? That's what studies show, because new churches are laser focused on the Great Commission, and you're motivated to do that. And it's a delight to see what you're doing. That leads to just another question. I know that you live on mission, but I know that your church does as well. What have you done? You mentioned your mission statement, which is powerful. What are some other ways that you've instilled the value of living on mission? If you're a student, do that on campus. If you're working at Deer or at Village Inn, do it there. Or if you're in baseball or Little League, do it with other parents. Like how, or your neighborhood. How have you done that as a church?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we have a kind of what we call our ministry philosophy, which is we stole something from a book somebody a lot smarter than me wrote, and I can't remember the name of the book right now, which is terrible, but I'll find it later. But it's called the Oikos principle. So you think of the Greek yogurt company.
Was that Win Arn?
I don't think so. I think his last name was Mercer. I could be wrong, but it's kind of the idea, like the Greek word oikos is in the New Testament. It represents like a family or like a household unit. Yep. And so the author of that book kind of took it a different direction, which is a household in the New Testament was bigger than just your immediate family, because it would be, most households included like several generations, and then like your servants and like the household servants. And so you had this group of, I think the title of the book may actually be like 8 to 15. But like the point he was making was that like when the New Testament talks about the Philippian jailer and his household were all saved and baptized, it was probably talking beyond just his family. Like it was probably talking about a generation or two and his household servants. And so the author makes the point that like each of us, we all have like, somewhere between 8 to 15 relationships. That's all we can really maintain, right? Like you have, relationships, and then you have like relationships, right? And so we're all uniquely positioned to reach this small group of people. And that small group of people is who you can reach that I can't reach, right? And so something like a lot of our missionalness is more organic than it is structured. Part of that's because we're a church plant. We're new. I think that'll change over the years as things develop.
That's healthy, though.
Yeah,
it's natural.
Is. Yeah.
So you inviting people over for dinner that you're having dinner with every Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So it's natural.
Yep. And that's something our people probably get mad hearing me say sometimes, or annoyed because I say it pretty often, which is don't invite someone to church that you haven't first invited over for a meal.
Ooh, that's good.
And the reason we say that, and I tell our people this too, is like the goal is not for you to invite people to church so I can tell them about Jesus. That's not my job. I'll gladly do it. Like, I'll preach the gospel. I'll invite people to salvation. But the reality is, the picture the New Testament paints is that you introduce people to Jesus. My job as a pastor is to equip you to do that.
All right, I'm going to pause there. That was a mic drop moment right there. You don't want to miss that.
These are connected.
No, they're connected, right? We don't want our tech guy, Dave, wouldn't be happy if we dropped these.
Yeah.
But if you're listening audio-wise or video, you might want to just rewind and catch that again. That was strong.
Yeah, and it's both and, right? Like, you're always excited when lost people come to a service for the first time, but the reality is, like, and the New Testament talks about this too, that people who are lost, their eyes are closed, their ears are stuffed up, their hearts are darkened. Like, lost is a good terminology. So, like, even when they come to a service for the first time, if they have no exposure to faith in Christ, they're going to be confused. Like, they're going to be sitting there thinking, this is weird. Like, I don't know what's going on here. And what's much more normative and healthy, I think, is when you're sitting across the dinner table from someone and you say, like, hey, what do you think happens after you die?
Yeah.
And you have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
You know, or something like that. And then out of that, all of a sudden, you know, you start having more conversations, and then one day after you've had a lot of these conversations, you go, I think I might have an answer to that question we talked about a long time ago. Maybe do you want to, like, come to this place I call church with me, and, you know, come hang out and just, you know.
Well, what struck me there is it's natural to have conversations even about national events.
Yeah.
So, like the floods in Texas, that's gripped people.
Yeah.
And so a natural conversation is, can you imagine what those families are going through? Or how about that person who had no idea they were going to die that day?
Yeah.
I wonder if they were ready. You know, now you're into a discussion on how quickly, how fragile life is, right? Like, that heartbeat I just had, that could stop 5 minutes from now.
Yeah.
Or a flood could come up.
Yeah.
Right? But it's more natural. We try to do those things preaching too, but I love that. It's more organic.
Yeah, and something we talk with our people about too is, and this again, not telling you what to do. This is just my philosophy that I've tried to guide people through. Is like, when you think about the process of salvation, you know, if God is the one who prompts, and God is the one who opens ears and opens eyes and shakes and stirs hearts, we're not in control of timing on that.
No,
right?
not at all.
Like,
well, and a lot of people need to hear the gospel 6 to 8 times before it makes sense.
Yeah, and so I always encourage our people, like, half of your job is to remain present in a person's life and wait for God to give you the opportunity, right? Like, and really you can't put your responsibility off, right? But
you can't go mute. Right.
Yeah, but you can be a healthy, God-honoring presence in someone's life and let things happen on God's timeline, right? And for some, like, the challenge of that is that may be 30 years. Like, I love sharing the story of my wife's grandpa, who was the staunchest atheist I've ever met. Like after he passed away, like, he had an entire bookshelf dedicated to disproving God. Like, shelves and shelves of books. And my father-in-law is a pastor too. My wife's whole family are believers. And so when they ministered to him his entire life, and he lived into his 90s, his entire life. And on his deathbed, he confessed Christ, like in front of that bookshelf full of books about atheism.
Oh,
you know,
praise God.
And so,
the
like,
work of the Spirit.
Yeah, but it's also a reminder, like, we're not in control of timing, you know? And so they could have, in that situation, given up, or they could have done what they did, which is up until the last moment, right? The very last breaths. And, like, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little emotional thinking about it. I was there, and God was the one who was working, right? And so our role as believers who are living on mission is to stay in the world, to not be polluted by the world, but to have a heart for the world.
Oh,
and you can't do that unless you're with lost people, right?
I'm reminded of a definition from Joe Aldrich. Evangelism is what spills over when you bump into someone. It's that proximity, right? It just spills over into your life. So speaking of natural, I don't know how much you can share on this, but one of my favorite pastor stories has to do with you.
Yeah, okay.
As you were able, by God's grace, to lead someone to Christ in a restaurant, and then other things were happening in the relationship he had with his girlfriend, and I'll pick it up from there, from what you can share.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. It was a lot of fun because it's a couple I love dearly. They're good friends, and again, just God's timing in their life led them on a path where they were wanting to get married, and in the moment before that, they were in a different place in their faith journey. The husband hadn't come to know Christ yet, and did, and through that process, they were ready to get married, but after that moment of salvation, we got together for what I thought was going to be like our first premarital counseling meeting, and they came in and they were kind of quiet, and I was like, okay, so let's start with this, and they're like, hey, we're kind of like under conviction, like that we need to make this.
They wanted to make it right.
Yeah, and I was like, well, what do you mean? And they're like, can we get married like now? And I was like, yes, we'll figure everything else out on the backside. And so it was kind of funny because that meeting happened while our worship team was rehearsing for worship that Sunday. And so I went in and I was like, hey guys, I need you to just pause worship practice for a minute because we've got to do a wedding really quick. And they thought I was joking.
So they went off the platform and out there while you did the wedding vows.
Yeah. Best marriage I've ever been a part of. It was so cool. And God is working in their lives and their marriage and their parenting. It's really powerful to watch.
And I've heard her give her testimony related. It's just all glory to God in there. Tanner, I also just wanted to thank you publicly. There's an Edgewood members here. They sit back there. You kind of know where people sit.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And she had a family member who was in the hospital in Peoria. And she was just very concerned about this family member's salvation and was in a bad spot physically.
Yeah.
And said, do you know anybody in Peoria? And it triggered in my mind that you had come from Northwoods, and I had forgotten you were in Galesburg.
Yeah.
I thought, well, maybe you know. So I reached out to you, and you were very humble about it. You said, yeah, I found a pastor and went to visit. I think she had a gospel conversation with this person, prayed for the person. And then you go, oh, that was my dad.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of funny because, I think my dad was actually, they have like a rotating like pastor on call schedule there.
Okay.
And so I think he was actually the pastor on call. So I was like, hey, is there somebody like you guys could send over there? I was like, I'll just go. Which was awesome.
Well, it was wonderful because I was able to help our members here who were just broken up about this family member's status, spiritual status, and how this individual was doing physically.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Yeah,
and that's an example of our friendship. When we know, you and I have talked over the years about other ministry things as well, and I love that.
Yeah.
You brought a team of leaders and others from your church to the Holy Sexuality Conference that Edgewood hosted.
Yeah.
Was that helpful to you guys?
Yeah, no, it was awesome. You guys did just a phenomenal job with the conference as a whole, but it was really beautiful. We had both some of our staff, some of our elder team, some of our volunteer leaders who were working like in student ministry. And so it was really cool. We were kind of talking about this beforehand, and there was a lot, like I would highly encourage anyone to turn to those resources, the books, the video lectures, all those kind of things.
They're still on our website for free.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and what a beautiful thing to have, such a well thought out and more importantly, like the testimony. And that was what we were talking about before, like in a world where believers are, basically constantly being told that they're bigoted or they're crazy or whatever it is, to be able to listen to someone who God has transformed their life and who came out of that was so powerful. Like, because it's that affirmation, you're right before the Lord, but then to be able to point and say, this is what it's supposed to look like when God, gets a hold of somebody's heart. You're like, okay, this is worth doing the work for, and so it was really awesome. Thank you guys for doing that.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you for joining us today for our podcast. Tanner, I just wanted to wrap up. I rejoice. I drive by your church, and whenever I do, I pray for you. Yeah. And sometimes I shoot you a text to say I just prayed for you. But the Lord's provided a new sign for you, which you needed. The new sign is very visible. It catches people's eye. Yeah. And now you have this beautiful parking lot too, because you've needed more parking. And I just love watching what the Lord is doing for His glory as you guys live on mission there, as you're faithful to the gospel. I hope you're in the Quad Cities a long time, and that we can continue to be friends and partners in ministry. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, you're
Appreciate
welcome.
you guys.
Thanks for tuning in today. Keep living on mission, and if something stirred you today, don't just think, well, that's neat, or I hadn't heard that before. Perhaps the Holy Spirit's prompting you to take a step. So whatever that step is, take it, walk in obedience, keep walking with Jesus, keep living on mission for His glory and the fame of His name. Until next time.